I do think the value of human content on the internet in a world where the ratio of human to AI content probably continues to diverge, it puts the premium on human content. So my running joke is there's never been a better time to be a human than there has been today.
Yeah. Every couple of weeks, there's like a new model that's supposed to be state of the art, beating benchmarks. But then when I talk to actual developers, they're like, no, we're using this other thing from like 6 months ago. How are developers even deciding what models to use at this point? Like, what's going on there?
This is not a trivial process to answer this question. There is no truth of what the best answer is. It's human judgment to be like, which of these outputs do I like better? Gone are the days where you ask the model a really simple question and it provides a bunch of value. The next step of the value creation is actually going and doing stuff for users. There's never been a better time to build stuff than today. So go build something that people want. This is such a beautiful moment.
Logan, welcome to the show. Excited to have you back again. You are one of the most unique people in AI and uniquely interesting people in AI because you might be the only person who's worked at both OpenAI and Google. You were there from the early days of OpenAI. Now you're kind of, at Google when they're in full swing. What's that experience been like? What are some of the interesting similarities or differences between both companies? Would love to hear a little bit about that.
When I joined OpenAI, it was very much like a research lab. There was the applied side of OpenAI was very, very small, predominantly research taking place. There was a small number of folks working on the API. There was a few folks early working on what ended up becoming ChatGPT, but not a product organization. And yeah, I think if you look at OpenAI today, it's predominantly product, predominantly the go-to-market function to actually bring the models and all that stuff to the world. So very different, I think culturally, despite, research being something that's really important, I think has shifted significantly over time. And, I felt that for myself at OpenAI. And I think in many ways, coming to Google has been this really nice, I don't want to say blessing of an experience, but it really does feel like going back to this very research culture, this very open research culture, which I very much appreciate. And I tweeted something about this a long time ago, but it makes as someone whose job it is to bring models to the world through developer products. It makes it really easy for me to do that job when I'm able to deeply collaborate with research. And I think, for a variety of reasons, Google is just very well set up for this and have been actually very intentionally orchestrating on the DeepMind side, the ability for DeepMind to be sort of vertically integrated from foundational research to actual model development to then how we deliver these models to the world through the Gemini app on the consumer side to the developer products, AI Studio and the Gemini API. So I think it's a lot of fun. I think you just have more flexibility in what you build when you sort of control everything down to the TPU silicon.
Yeah. I think that's a nice segue into the actual model. So it's been a couple of weeks now. The new 2.0 models are out. I think 2.0 Flashlight just went into production yesterday, if I saw that right. So for folks who are tuning in, any developers, builders, founders, even PMs and designers, can you tell us a little bit about more about the new family of models and what's in it for them?
Yeah, I love that. That's a great question. I think so. The chapter one of the Gemini story was us sort of building the first Gemini models, really focused on this sort of multimodal and long context story. The original Gemini model had, a million token long context. It was natively multimodal. It was the first model that could take in image, audio, video, and understand. And that's unlocked a ton of really differentiated developer use cases. If you actually look at the blog that came out for Flashlight yesterday, it was, sort of highlighting a bunch of these use cases of where developers are using multimodal capabilities to build experiences, which literally were not possible before, which is always awesome to see. And chapter two of this Gemini story, which sort of started last December with the experimental release of 2.0 Flash and sort of took the next step over the last few weeks with 2.0 Flashlight and 2.0 Pro and the main 2.0 Flash model. has really been about like sort of how do we lay the foundations for the future of agents, and also sort of putting the finishing touches on the multimodal story. So 2.0 Flash has been trained to natively now take in image, audio, video, but also output audio and image as well. And there's a bunch of really interesting use cases that are unlocked for both of those domains, multimodal output, that you actually really need a model that has world knowledge. So there's all this if you ask the model to generate images, like the model being able to intuitively understand like the relationship between, a chair and a desk and something falling, or all those types of things, like end up with these like very like visceral, interesting experiences that like you can't create with like an image generation model, as an example. And same thing on the audio front, like the model like really understands the world, so it can like really generate audio to sort of resemble the things that you care about. So those are the sort of finishing touches on the multimodal story. Hopefully we'll roll that out more broadly. It's in our early access program right now for developers. The sort of new chapter is around agents, and sort of how do we lay the foundation for developers to go and build the products in which they're most excited about, which today is agents. And I think there's a bunch of stuff that we did across like native tool use and search and code. We just shipped a bunch of updates to code execution so developers can have sort of a sandbox environment. Now to actually like reasoning, which is the sort of fourth pillar of our Gemini model family, is the Flash reasoning model. So I think all of those things are culminating to like really allowing developers to build the experiences, which I think like they've sort of been promised in many ways that they've been able to build. And I think the reality is like you historically couldn't build these things. And I think we're finally like catching up to the model quality being good enough that developers can actually build agents that scale in production and do all the things that they want to.
That's a great point. And actually just curious to know, like, what are some interesting examples in the last 90 days or 60 days you've seen being built on Google's like Gemini model family?
I think some of the stuff that I'm most excited about, and a lot of these haven't reached production yet, because the API is still experimental. But if folks haven't tried the Multimodal Live API, it's powered by all those things I described: native tool use, like native multimodal inputs, long context, audio generation. All those things are sort of part of that Multimodal Live API, and it really enables this AI co-presence experience. And if you think about sort of how do you use AI today? Like most of the way that people use AI today is I have a chat experience somewhere, or I have a text input box somewhere, and I have to go and basically take all the relevant context that the model needs in order to answer my query, like manually do the work of gathering that context, and then bring that context to the model in order to have it sort of produce anything of value for me. It's like, I think gone are the days where like you ask the model a really simple question and it like provides a bunch of value. I think that's true. That's like a very narrow use case. It's like the like 101 of information retrieval. And like there's like that works today. It works really well, actually. There's like not a lot more that you can do with that. Like the next sort of value step of the value creation is like actually going and doing stuff for users. And that requires context. And again, the challenge for users is it's a pain in the ass to go get context and like give it to the models. And the Multimodal Live API is so great because like as a user, you can just share your screen with the model or show the model your camera, something like that. And it can sort of have memory and context as you're going through this conversation. It can do things like, dispatch search. If you ask questions about like, why am I seeing the error message that I'm seeing, as an example, it can just call search behind the scenes. It can go and execute code on your behalf. If there's lots of things flashing on the screen and happening, you can sort of keep track of them and then like actually execute code to, persist some of this information. So there's tons of stuff that can be done. And that's what I'm getting most excited about. Like that, again, that experience like doesn't exist.
The optionality and like the flexibility is like, seems like pretty impressive with the new model.
100%. And yeah, I think like similar to like, I've talked about this before, like similar to how like for folks who have tried Notebook LM, like the thing that makes the Notebook LM experience actually possible is Gemini 2.0. And like the same thing that makes, and like long context and all this, and like the same thing is true of the Multimodal Live API. People, I think, like forget that it's actually Gemini that's powering this experience. Like it's not some other system. So it's super cool to see that.
So, Logan, just like a quick question as a follow up on that, right? Like, so Zen and I are playing with a lot of these different LLM models. Like, some of the key questions we always have is, hey, like as a developer, cost, performance, and speed are like always something we kind of think about. And then the last thing is obviously the output quality. So, if you were building something, uh, how would you kind of go about thinking that? Would be these like the same pillars for you? Would you kind of think about some other stuff? How would you kind of like think about testing these things and going about building stuff?
Yeah, I think a lot of this depends on like what you're trying to build specifically. I think like traditionally the advice has been like use the highest quality model, don't worry about cost, go and sort of make your use case work, and then find a way to sort of whittle down the cost profile so that you can actually do like a production deployment.
Yeah.
It's not clear to me, like, I think like that is still seems like reasonable advice today. It's not clear how much that advice has actually been like a trap for stopping AI deployments, because like you just end up doing all the work and then realizing, and maybe this actually isn't possible at the cost profile that matters, because like we're, whatever your company is like really sensitive about how much money you want to spend on a per user basis or something like that. In a world where like intelligence is sort of, the cost is going down and it's becoming too cheap to meter, like how like the constraints of building that product is actually somewhat different than like try to use the most expensive thing possible to enable this. Like I think there's just like some very significant nuances between the different ones. And I think like the good thing for us on the Gemini front is like we are at the sort of Pareto frontier of what's possible from an intelligence per dollar, percent, whatever you want, perspective. Like the amount of AI that you can bring into the world, the amount of intelligence you can bring into the world with Gemini is like, it's in a class of its own. If folks have looked at like artificial analysis, it's got this really great, chart, and there's like a whole upper right quadrant where like it's just Gemini Flash in that corner by itself, which is cool. But like I think also speaks to why developers like Flash, which is like it is this really nice balance of cost performance trade-off. And like we kept that in mind as we were sort of building 2.0 and wanting to make the model actually better than the previous 1.5 Pro model, with more capabilities at like a significantly lower price. So it's crazy to see that continue to go down. And yeah.
I want to pull together a couple of threads from things you said in the last like 5-10 minutes. Is number one is like people always look at AI models in terms of like pure performance, but I think one of the big stories over the last 12 months is how much the cost has actually come down, right? And lower cost obviously enables more use cases. But the other thing the thread that I want to pull together with this is the Gemini Live API, right? So you just mentioned it's all sort of like an always on thing that's always around you. You can share your screen. So it's constantly watching you, what you're doing on your screen. It can teach you a new skill. It can give you feedback on how you're performing. Same thing with camera, right? Like, I don't know, maybe there might be a future where I'm going to play golf and want to improve my swing, and it's just there on the camera telling me exactly how to do it. Or maybe there's something broken, in my fridge, can't fix it, helping me with that. I think we talked about this last time we chatted, but for me, it's like the idea of like an always-on CEO coach, right? So I'm a founder, I'm a CEO at this point. So to me, if I can get like 140, 150 IQ CEO that has access to all of like, the world's knowledge in terms of what every great founder or CEO has ever said, and constantly coach me and watch me and everything from a micro task. Like, hey, I think you can be doing this task better this way, or I think you could be running this meeting better in this manner, to high level stuff. Like, here's how you're allocating your time these days, over the last week, over the last month, and so on. There's how you should actually be kind of doing it, right? And I think when you look to the future, the very like broadly very exciting thing is like this omnipresent of every ever-present AI that's just constantly coaching you. Like in coding, you have the idea of like pair programming, right? Like someone smarter than you does that. But this is like a pair AI that just coaches you like through the rest of your life, right? Am I broadly thinking about the future correctly? Like, what do you is this the most exciting thing right now that's happening in Google? Because that's what it looks like to me from the outside.
Yeah, I think, well, so two angles of this. One, I think the cool thing is the excitement is actually for the external developer world. Like the person who's like, Google will have some version of this product. We'll have it in the ChatGPT app. Maybe it'll live in your Chrome browser or something like that. Maybe it'll live in the Gemini app, whatever it is. Like lots of products will have this. I think developers are the ones who are actually sort of going to build a lot of the like depth into this experience. I think the only caveat to the CEO coach example that you gave is like, I think you're in the position where like you want to be coached. And I think there's a lot of people who like, I actually don't want the model being like, hey, go do your job better like all day. Like that could be kind of annoying in a lot of cases. I think like what people do want though is like, hey, I saw this was happening. You maybe like didn't finish this task. Like I actually just like have this thing queued up to like finish solving this problem for you. Like, can you just go ahead and like, press accept and I'll go fire off the draft to this email that you started, or like finish searching for this thing, or end up booking this flight for you, or like whatever the like task is that you're doing. And like taking the burden off of people, or there's a whole nother like version of that example, but being able to see what you do sort of, and like I feel this way personally, and I'm sure you feel this way like as a CEO running a company, but like, I'm dropping balls all the time. Like there's just like way too many threads that are going on. And like if the model can sort of help me retain some of that context and like keep some of those, like know which threads I'm dropping and like make sure that I don't drop them, I think that's the kind of stuff that's going to be enabled. And the cool thing is like it's actually literally possible today. Like I think there's a lot of rough edges in the Multimodal Live API, but like you could probably build, and like maybe you should build this like CEO coach experience. I feel like that'd be super cool just to see like how much value are you actually getting on a daily basis.
So one question, Logan, I had, this is like an interesting point on the learning piece, right? So if you're going to think about like what I've seen, at least models, is that models are really good at remembering all the contextual details and all the super specific detail on a Wikipedia page or like that article PDF you gave them. But as human brains, like, as kids, as we grow up, we don't really remember a lot of the specific details, but we kind of have a lot of the context around that. So how are you guys kind of thinking about enabling models to be able to have those connections so they can start maybe trying to innovate stuff and try to get predictions and things like that? I think that human context and not just knowing all the specific details enables us to kind of push our brains for like innovations and like predictions and stuff. I don't, just like a curious question.
Yeah. Hassan, I think you're spot on with that. That's where I think like we need maybe not like breakthroughs in memory systems, but like we need memory systems. Like it is like a real product space to be building in right now. It's a real like requirement for these systems to work well. And like, there's a bunch of versions of this where like, maybe you don't want to model it off of human memory. Like maybe they're like, you definitely don't need all of the context, but like you want some amount of like inherent filtering mechanisms to be like reducing the context over time, just because it becomes like exponentially more costly, but like also the content becomes like exponentially like less relevant and useful. So yeah, I think that system has to exist. I think there's like lots of products that have sort of taken the first step. Like the Gemini app has a little bit of memory built into it. We need a lot more of that if like people are going to get, again, like the promise of AI.
So maybe for our listeners, if she can describe what is actually memory in the context of a model, and also what is context window in terms of an LLM model. Because I think those are two very critical things which developers need to know, and also users who are using these models need to understand.
Yeah. That's a great question. Context window is just basically the models. Every time you talk to the model, it's like it has no knowledge of who you are or any conversations previously or anything like that. So all of the information that you need the model to know has to be, if you're a developer, has to be like passed back to the model for it to like sort of process, understand, and then generate an answer. The model is sort of, the model in this example is literally like a server sitting somewhere, and like the server doesn't know who you are. Like the information about who you are or your past conversations or whatever it is has to be passed to the server so that I can like generate an answer to whatever your query is. So this is, again, and like the model, the like server, the model, however you want to think about it, is limited by how much of that information it can take in. There's also like an inherent incentive to pass as little of the information in as possible, because like you actually have to pay for that information. So it's not free to pass in more information to the models. So there's all these like weird incentives as you're thinking about context. And this is actually why, like, again, like lots of AI problems are not that the model's not smart enough. It's that the right context or high quality enough context isn't actually being passed to them. The right information isn't. And like the best example of this is like we all have humans in our life. And, a lot of folks probably listening have worked a job before. If you go choose your favorite random coworker, if you give them a 1 sentence description of some task you want them to do, if it's more than just like some very discrete action, like close this bug, here's the link, press this button on that page, like the chance that they end up doing the thing in which you like in a way that you would have wanted them to is actually pretty slim. Like what happens when you want a human to do something for you and do it well? You spend an hour talking to them, or like 20 minutes or 30, or you write an entire like page about the stuff you want. And like, it takes weeks or iterations. And like, for some reason, we just expect the models to like be connected to our brain and know that like when I say write a blog post about AI for me, I really want them to write about the Gemini API and how developers should be thinking about it, yada, yada. Like none of that information is there. And like we sort of implicitly forget that the model has none of that context.
That's such an interesting point, right? Like our expectation of a human is that we'll spend their time to like teach them, help them get that. But for the model, like, hey, we're giving you like 2 lines of prompt, and in 10 seconds, generate us everything we expect you to generate at like 90% quality.
The big delta though, and this is where I think it is actually on the sort of model providers and the people who are building products. Like the reality is if you go and ask your sort of teammate to do that thing for you, they're going to be like, what are you talking about? Like, I need way more information than this. Like, I can't go and do this task for you unless you give me this context. And like humans are very good at that in a lot of cases, if they're empowered in the right way, to be like, tell me what you really want me to do, versus like the models are, because of the inherent way that the models are trained, they're trained to answer the thing that you ask them to. They don't know that like, oh, you're really meaning this, or I should go and ask these follow-up questions. So I think that sort of system needs to be built sort of in parallel to memory. And memory is like, how do we make it so that you don't need to constantly retell the model that you're, a developer, or that you program in these languages, or that you live in this city, or whatever it is. You can sort of retain that context, have it persist from session to session, from conversation to conversation, in order to get the right context to the model, so that you ultimately get better outputs.
How are developers even deciding what model to use at this point? I feel like every couple of weeks, there's like a new model that's supposed to be state of the art, beating benchmarks. But then when I talk to actual developers, they're like, no, we're using this other thing from like 6 months ago. It's working way better than whatever this new kind of benchmark story is. Like I think a lot of developers don't even buy the benchmark story at this point. I'm not saying that the model makers are being disingenuous, but I think there's like some reality to, what's happening with the benchmark versus what's actually going on are two different things. And I think in the absence of like, evals and reliable benchmarks and so on, there seems to be like a disproportionate influence of like Twitter shit posters, right? Like I think so much of this is just driven by like hype by anon accounts, which I love them. But like, sometimes it generally feels like when a model comes out and they're like, oh, ASI is here. And it's like, but you told me ASI was here 2 weeks ago. And it's like, it's like this kind of hype cycle of every time a model comes out, ASI is here, AGI is here. And it's like, man, like, we've had ASI come out like 24 times in the past year. Like, how many more times can we get ASI, right? And coding and so on. And, it's like, and then, this thing that's supposed to be ASI or AGI doesn't even have any user adoption from like real users or developers. So just want to get your thoughts on like, how are developers even deciding what models to use at this point? Like, what's going on there?
Yeah, I think your assessment is actually like more or less spot on. And for what it's worth, like I have a lot of empathy for developers, because it's not like, this is not a trivial process to answer this question. Like there's so many use cases still today where like there is no truth of what the best answer is. Like you have to really like, so it's human judgment to be like, which of these outputs do I like better? It's not easy to just like say, this one is a correct answer, this one's not a correct answer. If it is like, you should go and make evals. If you have a use case where it's like very easy to decide what the truth is and what the truth isn't, like go make evals, automate this, make your life easy. Every new model comes, you just run it through evals, you figure out what model's best for you. Like your life should be simple and you can solve this problem. The challenge is there's a lot of use cases where that's not the case. And that's where I think this like vibe situation comes in, which is like, It's just, if you don't have any other better source of truth, like you just go look to the people who you find somewhat respectable. And then it's like, Andrej Karpathy says this new model is really good for him while he's building whatever random thing he's building on a Saturday morning. Like, oh, that must be good for me then as well. I think we need like, and this is why I think there's these like multi billion-dollar outcome potential for eval products and companies. Like someone needs to build this platform. The fact that like I can't easily, and like artificial analysis, I think today is like the closest thing that does this, where like I can go to a single page and see all the information about a model across all of this stuff. And I think that's why they have traction, is they've done a good job of like, show me all of the data that I need to make an informed decision as a developer, and like let developers decide on the trade-offs between those things and like show them the different options versus like I think there's a lot of leaderboards where it's like a very opinionated perspective, but it fails to capture the like a bunch of the other pieces that developers care about, like cost, speed, latency, for example. It's like just quality. There's too many benchmarks today that are like just quality focused, which is challenging.
Awesome. So Logan, like it's been a pretty fun conversation. Like one last thing I would love to kind of understand is that whatever you are able to share, what's in the roadmap for Google over the next 6 to 12 months? If I'm a developer looking to build, what should I be aware of?
I think the two things I'll share: one, reasoning models, huge amount of investment from us. I think this is the frontier. Like we really want to show up. We've done a bunch of stuff. We shipped our first version of a Gemini reasoning model back in December. We shipped the second version in January, and hopefully we'll have another version pretty soon. So I think there's just like lots of problems where the reasoning capabilities matter a lot. I think the second point is, if folks haven't seen the AI co-scientist work that we sort of showcased a couple of weeks ago, you should go look up like Gemini AI co-scientist on Google search or something, and you'll find the link to this. But I think it really hits on what's becoming possible with these models. I saw some thread the other day that was talking about, you know, if any human had knowledge of everything in the world and was trained on all the world's information, like you would expect them to be able to come up with novel outcomes. And like there hasn't been a lot of evidence of like models leading to like novel scientific engineering breakthroughs yet. And my response to that was like, you actually have to like prompt this stuff out of the models. Like the model has all this information. Can you orchestrate your question and the series of sort of responses in a way to like pull out novel information from the model? Like there's still a human who has to be in that driver's seat to do that type of discovery. And this AI co-scientist is a great example of this, which is like, it is literally like a system built around the Gemini 2.0 Flash model. Like it's not like a new model that we trained. And like, they're actually seeing like evidence of like some really, really novel stuff being pulled. So folks should definitely go in and look into that.
Okay, awesome. We'll maybe dig into that and give some examples when we're doing the newsletter article on this as well. So I want to end the conversation on a more sort of like broadly philosophical / fun question. So seems like the nature of the internet is changing because of AI and LLMs. Ben Thompson from Stackery last week talked about, information being valuable again. So we're going to see a lot of information getting siloed, secrets becoming a thing again. We're seeing so-called AI generated slop, just AI generated stuff on the internet that doesn't make any sense. We're also seeing, SEO for LLMs, where, you want to write content in a certain way where it gets picked up by a certain model. So, that seems to be driving traffic for some folks. So there's all these interesting dynamics into how AI is like actively right here, right now in the moment, shaping the internet. What do you make of all of this? And what do you think the internet's going to look like in 5 to 10 years?
It's a tough question. One, I think like broadly, these are like the challenges that Google has to grapple with as a company, as the organization that's been the front door to the internet for so long. How do we make sure that the sort of ecosystem that we helped build is sustainable, and folks sort of have visibility into what's happening, and that like all of a sudden one day everything doesn't just fundamentally change, while also balancing that with like innovation to make the lives of people who are trying to do interesting things easier. My sort of personal perspective is, I think some of the points that you mentioned, I think are true. I do think like the value of human content on the internet in a world where the ratio of human to AI content probably continues to like diverge, it puts the premium on human content. So like my running joke is there's never been a better time to be a human than there has been than today, because like your value is, it really like you're unique in so many different ways. I think also like the two other points, the value of really powerful search infrastructure has never been as important as it is today. Like in a world where there's 100 to 1 potential useful to not, and like I don't think all the AI content is not useful, but like if that ended up being the case where it was 100 to 1 useful to not useful, like you want to have a system that's able to identify and rank and show users the useful content. And like, great, Google's been solving that problem for 20 years now. Like it's not, this is not a new problem space for us to grapple in. So I'm happy, and like hopefully we'll continue to sort of play the role and help users solve that problem. The last point is I do think there's going to be a bunch of like human community spaces that exist on the internet. I think this is like fundamentally one of the big bets that I'm making is the base sort of internet experiences where humans interact with each other are essentially going to be overrun by AI stuff, especially as it becomes like harder and harder to sort of disentangle humans from AI. And like you can sort of see this happening on X or other like generally accessible platforms. There's just a lot of bots. There's a lot of AI that's happening. I think it's gonna be like a really tough game of whack-a-mole to stop that from happening. And I think what's going to happen is like there really will be like bespoke AI community spaces built where you like have to go through some like crazy KYC process to like really make sure that you're a human. And you can imagine like it's at the extreme end of this is like the WorldCoin iris scan where like you actually have to like, ID some biometrically that you're a human and not, an AI bot. And like actually that might end up being really valuable because like you want humans to be like I think the worst outcome of all this is like humans become disconnected from each other. And like, I think, history, there's many lessons of like what happens when you disconnect humans from each other. It's like a bunch of very bad, perverse outcomes. And like, those are not great things for the world. We need humans to be able to connect. And like, if the current places in which people do that on the internet aren't accessible to do that anymore, like we need new places is the reality.
Yeah. Yeah. Logan, this has been an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for this. Before we drop off, is there anything that's top of mind for you that you wanted to say, but we haven't asked you?
I think my only comment is like, there's never been a better time to build stuff than today. So like, go build something that people want.
Yeah.
AI Studio is free. The Gemini API has like a super generous free tier. It's like a 1.5 billion tokens every day for free. So like, hopefully the like cost of AI to get started shouldn't be a blocker. Like, go build something. This is like such a beautiful moment.
This is awesome. Thank you so much, Logan.